There was a small, old broken casita in the village, somewhere in Mexico or Oaxaca. One would be crazy to live here, but for some, it was their only option. La casita was a light shade of yellow, with the paint peeling off. The door was hanging by a thread. It was in the woods, where no one can hear a thing. When it's night, let's just say you have to sleep with one eye open. There was a family named Las Cassandras. Estela, the mom, Jose, the dad, and poor little Dalia, who was an only child. They were very poor. Only the dad worked, while Estela took care of Dalia all day. But sometimes Estela worked with him for extra money. On Dalia's 7th birthday, she was gifted a doll, something her parents saved so long for. The doll had pale skin, dark brown hair, and blue eyes. Dalia loved it, as she always wanted a sister. She named the doll Dali. She took the doll everywhere, to school, to bed. You'd think she lived the best life ever. But one day, she took Dali for a walk in the woods when both of her parents weren't home. She was always told not to because it was dangerous. The naive girl thought her doll would be her guardian. When Dalia was walking in the woods, she heard someone in the bushes, saw 2 black eyes staring at her. And as she heard them, she ran back home. She runs and runs and runs as fast as her little legs could go. As she sits in her room, her door opens and the man grabs her by the neck. Dalia screams bloody murder, using her doll to protect, but it wasn't enough. The man stabbed her repeatedly and tried to take her body with him. As the man leaves, her father from behind knocks him out. But it was too late. Dalia's lifeless body lies on the ground, blood all over the floor, all over the Dali doll. The Cassandras decide to move out after burying their daughter, with the Dali doll on top. Out of nowhere, the Dali doll's eyes turn from blue to brown, and her hair turns pitch black. The Dali doll has disappeared magically. Since then, no one ever lives around that house. And all you can hear is a little girl crying in the woods.
When David walked into the cafe, he made eye contact with a woman walking out. They just looked at each other for a few seconds, but he could see her scanning his facial features. Why would she do that? He wondered. David stumbled over his words as he ordered his coffee. He had just glanced to his side and saw an old man with white, fading hair looking at him, not at his eyes, but at his torso. David was just wearing a white sweater, a little wrinkled and dotted with dog hair. It made him question how he looked to everyone else. As soon as he paid and got his coffee cup, David left the shop. David walked across the street. The breeze was too strong for his sweatshirt and jeans to block the cold, but the coffee warmed him up to compensate. As he strolled down the sidewalk, he saw a man around his age wearing a black coat and talking on his phone. Their eyes aligned for a second, and then the man looked down at David's clothes. Before they walked past each other, the stranger continued looking straight forward, as if he saw nothing. "The vet said she's fine, but I might have to switch to a different brand," he heard the stranger speak into the phone as they passed by. David turned his eyes back to right in front of him. Continuing down the sidewalk, David saw a short woman in white clothes walking towards him, with her eyes down at her phone. Before he could shift out of her way, she looked up from her phone at him and immediately moved to the other edge of the sidewalk. David then glanced across the street. He had never been in this part of town before. He saw a tall man leaning against a streetlight pole. He had a long-sleeved blue shirt with sleeves rolled up and dark glasses. He faced David with no discernible expression. David turned back to his front and kept walking, but he couldn't help but look back after walking a few more meters. The man with the sunglasses was still facing him. David walked a little faster. David started to feel sick to his stomach. He started looking around and something behind him caught his eye. A woman in black clothes was running far behind him, and she was catching up. She was staring at him. David could quickly tell she was coming after him. All he could think in that moment was run. David dropped his cup of coffee and quickly sped up. As he neared the next intersection, he looked to his right and saw the same man who was leaning against the streetlight, walking towards him. He immediately turned the corner. "Who's after me? Why?" he wondered. He ran as fast and as far as his legs could take him. He looked behind him and didn't see anyone familiar. He slowed to a stop to catch his breath, but he still didn't feel safe. David could tell they were watching him. Luckily, he noticed an alleyway right next to him, so he ran inside. He went as far into the dark space as he could, hoping he could hide. Someone ran past the entrance to the alley. "I lost him," he thought. But then, someone stopped in front of the alley. David looked around, realizing he'd trapped himself in a corner. David's muscles strained with fear as the figure approached him. "Why are you chasing me?" David asked. "I don't want to hurt you, David," I said. "We know what happened wasn't your fault. I'm just going to take you back to the hospital." "What? No," David responded. I approached him carefully. "No, you can't take me!" David tried to run past me, but I easily grabbed him and pushed him to the ground. I put the handcuffs on him and read him his rights, even though he wouldn't stop screaming. "This is Agent Callagher," I said into my radio. "I have him cuffed in an alley on Barn Street." Agent Torres entered the alley not too long later. "That's him?" Torres asked me. "What's his problem?" "He's just got paranoid schizophrenia. The death's not his fault. Let's just get him back to the professionals."
It had been a stressful semester, and after finishing midterms, Sarah, Maya, and the rest of their study group were desperate to unwind. One night, as they sat together in their cramped dorm room, James suggested something different. A game. Not a drinking game or a board game, but something darker. Something that promised a thrill none of them were prepared for. "You ever heard of the game of remains?" James asked, his voice low, his expression unusually serious. The room seemed to darken as he spoke, the city lights casting strange, jagged shadows against the walls. They hadn't heard of it, and their curiosity piqued. James explained the game in a hushed voice, the words coming slowly, deliberately, like he was reciting something from memory rather than telling a story. It was an old game, older than any of them could imagine, passed down in whispers and never written down. It was meant to be played only at night, in total darkness, and once it began, the players were bound by one unbreakable rule: silence. No screams, no gasps, no giggles. If anyone broke the silence, the game would end, and not in a way any of them wanted. They laughed it off at first, but there was something about James's demeanor, something about the tension in the air that made them hesitate. Still, their curiosity got the better of them, and one by one, they agreed. After all, what was the worst that could happen? It was just a game. James closed the blinds, shutting out the distant glow of the city. The room plunged into complete darkness. The only sounds were the soft creaks of the old building and their own breathing. James made them sit in a tight circle on the cold, hard floor, their knees nearly touching. "Once in this very city, there lived a man named Vincent," James began, his voice low, a whisper that seemed to wrap around them in the blackness. "He was murdered, torn apart. His body was never found, at least not whole. But tonight we have him, and we will pass him around." Sarah's stomach churned as she felt a cold, slimy mass being placed in her hands. James had said it was supposed to be Mr. Vincent's brain. She gripped it just long enough to feel the cold, wet texture before quickly passing it on. She could almost swear she felt it pulse in her hands. Next came his eyes. Maya's hands trembled as James placed 2 round, soft objects in her palms. They were unnervingly cold and squishy, like peeled grapes left out too long. She passed them on quickly, fighting the urge to gag. No one made a sound. Piece by piece, they passed around what James claimed were Mr. Vincent's remains. His brittle nose, his dry, decaying ear, a hand that felt too real, the flesh loose and damp, as though it had been dug up from a shallow grave. The smell hit them next, faint at first, like wet earth and mildew, but soon growing stronger, the air thick with the stench of rot. The game wore on, the darkness closing in around them. No one dared to move, not even to shift on the cold floor. James's voice droned on, growing softer, more ominous with each word. And now his heart, James whispered. Sarah tensed as something wet and heavy was placed in her hands. It was warm, too warm, and it pulsed, it beat, slowly, rhythmically, as though it were still alive. Thump, thump, thump. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She passed it on without making a sound, but she could feel the pulse echoing in her ears, growing louder, more insistent. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint thump of the heart as it moved through the circle. And finally, James said, his voice barely above a whisper now, his blood. The smell hit Sarah before she even touched it. The coppery, metallic scent filled her nose as a bowl of something thick and warm was passed to her. She dipped her fingers into it, recoiling as the liquid clung to her skin, sticky and thick. It was warm, and in the darkness she could almost imagine the blood was real. She pulled her hand back, wiping it on her jeans, but the feeling remained, slick, warm, wrong. And that's all there is, James whispered. His voice had changed, growing darker, deeper. Except for the worms that ate the rest of him. A bowl was passed around, filled with something cold and slimy. Sarah barely touched it, but the sensation of wet, wriggling shapes made her skin crawl. She wanted to scream, but she held it in, the silence now more oppressive than ever. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was still, their circle unbroken. They had made it through the game, just as James had said. But then, from somewhere in the room, a voice, low, rasping, and not James, broke the silence. "Give me back my remains." Sarah's heart froze. The voice wasn't human. It was wet, broken, guttural, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the walls, filling the room with a chill that seeped into her bones. "Return what's left of me, before it's too late," it said again, louder this time. Maya whimpered, her voice barely audible. "James, stop it, this isn't funny." James didn't respond. Sarah turned toward where he had been sitting, but in the darkness, she couldn't see anything. The floor creaked. A shadow moved in the corner. Something was in the room with them. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw it, rising from the darkness, slow and deliberate, its form gaunt, skeletal. Its eyes, black hollow sockets, seemed to gleam with a hunger that made her stomach turn. "Give me back my remains," it whispered, one last time, its voice dripping with malice. The door slammed shut. The walls seemed to close in. There was no escape. And one by one, they screamed.
There once was a lady who feared the sea. Nobody could ever convince her to journey out into any body of water that went above her waist. Her parents couldn't even get her any swimming lessons, for she absolutely refused to journey out into the pool. There was no deep, traumatic reason for her fear. She simply could not stand being near the water. She handled heights swimmingly well, being able to skydive or zip line without too much anxiety. Spiders and dogs never quite tickled her dread either. It was simply the ocean. The vast, open ocean. She would sit to herself, pondering what could be out there. Nearly 80% of it all was unexplored. So who knew what could be out there? Her mind would often wander to dark places, imagining of leviathans and sea serpents coming up from the deep to bring her down where she could not be seen again. She would think about the unfriendly, pitch-black depths that lie so far down. She would have dreams about being down where no person has been, absolutely surrounded by a watery darkness, down below the layers of ocean, at a point where no light from the land or sky above could travel. She'd step around a bit, feeling sand below her heavy, suited steps, and then, off in the distance, a light would appear. It would be faint, barely visible under any normal circumstances, but in an area completely derived of light, it stuck out with great importance. She'd be frozen, stuck staring at the beacon. Then it'd get closer. She wouldn't be able to move, as if she were but a doll being held in place by a bored child. Closer. Closer. Closer the light would come. And then it stopped. At first it seemed like there was nothing there, like it was just a disembodied light resting above her. But then she would look down just below the light. There was something just beyond her vision, barely illuminated by the beam. It was a recognizable face, human-like in nature, but it just wasn't right. It nearly blended in with the surrounding black of the oceanic abyss. She could only see the thing from the bridge of the nose up, a vague depiction of shallow eyes staring down at her. The eyes pierced through her in a way a predator might stare at its prey. She was the one at the disadvantage in this cruel staring contest. Was it human? What was a human doing down so far below, and without any proper diving gear at that? Just simply there. Then the thing would lean forward, closer into the light, revealing barracuda-like teeth and a wide, unhinged jaw. Before she could ever process everything this being was made of, she would wake up. The ocean terrified the girl, and it would persist to her adulthood. In fact, this fear of the ocean consumed her so much, she decided to move further inland. She found a quaint home in a quaint town, right in the middle of everything. The small town was in a valley, but that was okay, as long as she lived as far away from the ocean, sea, lakes, anything as possible. She was happy. One day, there was a rather violent storm. At first, she didn't mind. Just a simple storm coming through, albeit in an common area, but the storm wasn't stopping. By the end of the day, if she stepped outside, the water would be up to her ankles. She tried her best to sleep, but she was having troubles. Thoughts of the water rising and rising kept her awake. After a restless night, the storm persisted. She could no longer open her front door, as the water had risen to just below her knees. She sat in her home, anxiety rising. By the time she went to bed, the storm had only grown worse. Every time she closed her eyes, visions of that thing from her dreams would appear. She would see it standing in the water outside her home, water up to its nose. She knew it wasn't a real thing, but it felt like it was really there. When she went downstairs, she could have sworn she would see its eyes just outside her window. Sometimes she would be standing in her living room, and she would hear desperate screams. It had to be all in her head. Hallucinations caused by her incredible fear of the deep. She would look out her window, and sometimes she would see hands pressed against the glass, as if waves of those things were trying to press their way in. Days passed, and the rain kept persisting. She could see that it had nearly entirely consumed her home, only a small gap visible at the very top of her second-floor window. The roof was probably safe, she thought to herself, but she had no way to get up there. One day, while she was sitting on the couch, a most dreadful thing happened. She could hear glass creaking. She turned her head towards her window. It looked like dozens of hands were all pressed against the glass, and she began to hyperventilate. The glass creaked more and more under tons of pressure. She tried to stand up, but her head was spinning. She tripped over her coffee table, landing on her back. She quickly picked herself up and ran for the stairs. But then a shatter came. She swiftly was consumed by water and pulled out of her home. She gasped for air and was barely able to keep herself afloat. She looked around desperately for anything that could help her. She saw all her neighbors up on their roofs. She tried to swim to her roof, but she just couldn't. She didn't know how. They were all pointing at her, nudging those who were next to them to see the poor girl. The woman who couldn't swim. The miss who moved as far inwards so she could avoid this very situation. The gal who was paralyzed at the thought of water going above her waist. The lady who feared the sea.
Can you pass me my knife? Laura's dad hollers at me from across the table. It slid under my chair just a minute ago. I'm meeting them for the first time. Let me just, I reply as I poke my right hand under my chair. I feel the metal on my skin and grab the knife. I then thrust it up and reach it towards Mr. Foss. He grins and leans forward in his chair to grab it. Thank you, James. You're welcome. So, James, what do you work for? Blair's mom interjects. I'm in cybersecurity. I take another bite of my salad. I crunch rather loudly as I bite into the cold lettuce. Oh, really? Yeah, Mom. I wouldn't date a dumb guy, Lara adds. I was never suggesting that, honey. Just making sure. I'm sorry if that's what it seemed like I was saying, Lara. Us Foss women don't have dumb taste. Your father is a doctor, after all. Mom, just... No need to apologize, Mrs. Foss. I communicate clearly. Her mom gets up. Oh, why are you getting up, Mom? Lara asks. Mrs. Foss breaks eye contact with her daughter. I was taking my morning swim and left the lemonade by the pool. I'll be right back. I see the lemonade outside. It's by the barbecue. It shines yellow like gold. I imagine they were entertaining people earlier. It's okay, hon. James can go fetch it right quick. Right, James? Mr. Foss seemingly, rhetorically, asks me. Sure thing, Mr. Foss. I get up from my chair and leave out the sliding glass doors to the backyard. Mr. Foss told me to shut them behind me so the cat doesn't get out. I haven't seen a cat in their house yet. The pitcher is sitting right on the side of the barbecue. I pick it up and notice 2 wasps guard the lid. I hit the first one off, successfully. I try to hit the second one off, but it stings my right pinky. As I reel in pain, I set the lemonade down on the counter and get down on the floor, writhing. I look back inside to see her family staring at me with their ripe eyes. They're still seated. My pinky swells and my hand convulses in response. It reverberates through my knuckles and into my palm. My hand trembles more. Her dad points at me and smiles, contently. I clench my still shaking hand into a fist. Their hawk eyes prod at me. I try to stop focusing on my pain. Lara is arguing with her dad. The pain pulses again through my finger and I writhe. Mrs. Foss is arguing with Mr. Foss as well. It's loud, but not loud enough for me to make out words. I bring myself to my feet slowly. Mr. Foss is arguing back at them. I grab the lemonade and start heading back inside. They're still yelling. I enter, and it's quiet. I got a sting. Do you guys have any painkillers? She gets up and rips the pitcher out of my hand. Right up here. She points to the leftmost cabinet. I yank it open and see some ibuprofen capsules. She's still worried. Wait, let me take a look. I lend her my right hand. With swollen pinky, she caresses it and then quickly pours me a glass of room temperature lemonade. She then takes out the painkillers and hands me 3. I chuck them into my mouth and swallow them with a quick swig of the lemonade, feeling no refreshment. My head is harshly pounding. The pain, however, subsides. Pretty bad sting you got there, says Mr. Foss. Those painkillers work fine? Sure is better than withstanding the pain on my own, Mr. Foss. Good. Now, I hope you wouldn't mind pouring me some water. Can do, Mr. Foss. I put on a smile. I grab his glass and then take it to the fridge to fill it with water. Then I put it on the table, right next to his plate. I sit down right after. Say, James. Mr. Foss cuts open a cherry tomato in a salad with his knife. Let's say you're on a nice night walk with my daughter, and you feel a cold prick on the back of your neck. It's the metal of a cult. What do you do to defend her and yourself? Now, hon, that is... His wife attempts to dismiss this question. Mr. Foss raises a finger to his lips slowly and hushes her quickly. The question stuns me. James. He interrogates. Well, to be frank, Mr. Foss, I don't know nearly enough martial arts to do anything proper, though I swear to you, I will try my damnedest to keep her safe. Mr. Foss takes a sip of his water. He sighs in satisfaction while staring me dead in the eyes. And what about yourself? The volume of the conversation rises as Laura and her mom try to shield me from his aggressive questions. I put myself at ease and let them talk him down. It eventually dies down, and I find myself watching some soccer with her dad. Not because I particularly love her dad, but I love soccer. There's something enthralling about the song and dance. All players protect the goal. Like the goal is their life they're saving. It's desperate, raw, and exhilarating. The match ends rather late, so I ask Mr. Foss if I can stay the night, because I know Laura will be. He lets me stay and shakes my hand with a pleasured gaze. I lay down to sleep with Laura for the night. I wake up in the middle of the night. I'm thirsty as hell, so I get up. I open the door of Laura's bedroom with a loud creak. I can hear the same soccer game I was watching earlier from down the hallway still playing. I cautiously step forward, and each floorboard creaks violently. The TV seems to be replaying a moment when a goalie stopped the ball right before going into the goal. I get through the hallway and move towards the fridge. I open a cabinet and grab a glass of water that creaks as well. The TV illuminates the living room across the kitchen. There's nobody there. I decide to go for some still leftover lemonade instead. I feel something looking at me in the dark. Hello? I whisper into the living shadow. A dark lunge punches at me. I dodge and slam into the counter. The lemonade spills and drips onto the floor. I look around and see a glimmer of an eyeball. I inhale. I back up. I exhale. Sweat drips down my brow. I hit a wall, backing up. Sweat pours. I back up further, and I then hit something soft. There's a cloth on my mouth. A wet cloth. It's cold. I feel myself fading. I fade. I fade to nothing. Then it's all black. I wake up with no sight. It's dead black. I feel zip ties yanking at my wrists and a rope ripping into my waist. I'm tied to a chair and my hands are tied to a table. Something touches my finger and I scream. It's an oily stub. Likely another finger. It feels gloved with latex. It examines mine, rubbing it up and down. I try to pry it off, but I can't hardly move it. I feel metal on my skin. Between my knuckle and my finger, it's sharp. It's on the stung pinky. The pain pulses. The oily stub presses down the finger. I yelp like a whimpering dog. It digs further. I feel it in my swollen skin and hear a disgusting slush until I hear a crick. It cracks my finger bone. I scream, I pant, I writhe, I hear pounding on the doors all around me. I hear Laura and her mom both scream. The knife twists and I feel my knuckle splitting apart from my finger. It reverberates into my palm. I get a sharp, tingling feeling as I scream out for help and feel my lungs contract as I do. They split with an audible pop. I can still feel a bit of the skin attached, desperately clinging to the finger. Pain strikes all through my forearm as it makes the final severance. I shriek in sheer pain. I feel the stub and metal move to my ring finger. I shake violently. I need to get it off. My finger gets aggressively held down. It cuts quicker and twists quicker. I scream quicker. My palm is wet with blood and hot with pain. They move again. I shake very violently. Lara's screams get louder, and so does the pounding. Her mom gets louder too. The stub rubs up and down the middle finger and holds it down, pressing it against the table. The knife cuts and twists into it. I scream again. The stub moves to my pointer finger and cuts sharply. The blood makes my palm stick to the table, so I still shake. It's no use. It's still no use. It cuts into the flange, and I hear a loud crack. Once more as it twists and cracks it off, then proceeding to cut off the last bit. Finally, it moves to my thumb. I can hardly shake anymore. I feel lightheaded. I feel a cut and twist. It's followed by a final cut. I can hardly feel the pain any longer over my welling vomit. I have a wet and fingerless hand. I hear the untwisting of a cap. It opens with a pop. I feel a forearm on my forehead. It presses it down against the head of the chair, and my head is now facing up. I feel another hand dig into my mouth and crack open my gullet. I feel pills. Pills enter my mouth. Too many of them. The hand stops prying my mouth open, yet I can hardly close it. I hear water spill out of a cup. I feel it hit my leg, and it's cold. I groan in an anxious fury. I can still hear the doors pounding around me, and the screams, too. Cold, cold water pushes itself down my throat, and I choke. I begin to cough as the missing hand rips open my mouth once more and streamlines a path to my gullet. I involuntarily try to swallow and gag in the process. My still attached fingers feel numb. I get lightheaded and begin violently twitching and shaking. Then, it's all black, all at once. I feel nothing.
It was Jenna's first semester at university, nestled in the heart of Chicago. The city intoxicated her. The towering buildings loomed like ancient gods, the nightlife thrummed with unrelenting energy, and the streets pulsed with the chaos of 1,000 students. But despite the allure of the city, Jenna's excitement dulled each time she returned to her dorm. Her assigned housing was in a dilapidated building on the outskirts of campus, Dormitory 13. The entire place felt wrong, like it was on the verge of collapse. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows, causing the walls to groan as if the dorm itself was alive. The pipes rattled in the walls, whispering secrets from the past. Worse still, her assigned roommate, Claire, had never shown up. It had been weeks now, and Jenna was left in eerie solitude. She wanted to enjoy the peace of having the room to herself, but the quiet was suffocating. At night, shadows stretched longer than they should, and the stillness hung thick in the air, heavy and watchful. Sometimes Jenna swore she could feel eyes on her, an unblinking gaze crawling across her skin. Every corner of the room seemed to pulse with something unseen, something waiting. The eerie atmosphere clung to her until late October, when a strange email arrived. Subject: Roommate request confirmation. Dear Jenna, you have been assigned a new roommate. Please welcome them upon arrival. Roommate information below. Claire Manning. Arrival, October 31st. Her heart stopped. Claire Manning? But Claire had already been assigned as her roommate. Jenna stared at the message, her mind spinning. A mistake, surely, but the date October 31st, prickled at the edges of her thoughts, unsettling her. Halloween night arrived after a long, grueling day. Jenna returned to her dorm, exhausted, planning to grab a quick bite before heading to a party. But when she stepped inside, she froze. There, on the untouched second bed, sat an old suitcase. Its plastic exterior was scratched and worn, but the mustard yellow color and faux leather trim screamed of another era. The suitcase looked out of place, as if it had been waiting here for decades. Jenna's stomach churned. Claire had finally arrived. "Claire?" Jenna called, her voice trembling. No answer. The air in the room felt heavier, the shadows deeper. The faint hum of the building was the only reply. A creeping unease crawled up her spine as she slowly approached the suitcase. Something about it felt wrong. It was too pristine, too carefully placed. And then Jenna heard it. A soft, rhythmic clicking sound from inside the case. Her breath hitched. An animal? Or worse? She knelt, hand trembling as she unlatched the suitcase. The metallic click echoed through the silent room. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Clothes, neatly folded, almost untouched by time. Toiletries carefully arranged. And at the bottom, an old black and white photograph. Jenna picked it up. The faded image showed two young women standing in front of this very dorm. One of them was Claire. She recognized her from the housing department photo. But the date scratched into the corner stopped her cold. October 31st, 1973. Jenna's pulse quickened. She felt a chill sweep over her, colder than the Chicago wind. This couldn't be right. Claire's arrival was just today, wasn't it? Panic bubbled up inside her when suddenly, her phone buzzed. We are sorry to inform you that due to an ongoing investigation, all students in Dormitory 13 are to evacuate immediately. Please head to the main office. Her blood turned to ice. Investigation? Evacuate? What investigation? She turned toward the door, ready to flee, when the faint creak of its opening froze her in her place. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the hall. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest as she backed up against the wall. A cold breath of air brushed her cheek, carrying with it a whisper so faint she barely heard it. "Give me back my room." Jenna's throat tightened. She spun around, staring at the open door. But no one was there. The hallway stretched out, bathed in the sickly green glow of emergency lights. Her heart raced, her hands shaking. Was someone playing a prank? Was this all just some twisted joke? "Claire?" she called out again, but her voice sounded thin, weak. A low groan echoed through the walls, and then the suitcase tipped over on its own, spilling its contents across the floor. The photo slid toward her, face down, the image of Claire staring up at her with lifeless eyes. And then she felt it. A touch, cold and bony, grazing her arm. Jenna screamed and stumbled back, her eyes wild with terror. She reached for the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the room. The lock clicked. She was trapped. Panicking, Jenna darted toward the window, desperately clawing at it, but it wouldn't budge. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing in closer, suffocating her. The air was thick and heavy with the stench of dust and rot. And then the voice came again, louder and more insistent. "Give me back my room." The shadows in the corner of the room began to twist and shift, forming the outline of something tall, gaunt, and impossibly thin. A figure emerged from the darkness, its matted hair hanging over a face that was barely human. Hollow, empty eyes stared at Jenna, and skeletal fingers reached out, curling toward her. It was Claire, or what remained of her. Jenna backed against the wall, her chest heaving with terror. The air around her grew colder, and the walls seemed to pulse, as if the dorm itself was alive and angry. The figure took another step forward, its raspy breath filling the room. The voice now, dripping with rage and desperation, whispered once more, "Give me back what's mine!" The last thing Jenna saw was the skeletal hand tightening around her throat. The last thing she felt was the icy grip of something far older than she could comprehend, something that had been waiting in the dark for too long. By dawn, Dormitory 13 was sealed, the truth buried beneath rumors and whispered legends. But one thing remained clear. No one ever dared to stay in Claire Manning's room again. And those who did, never lived to tell the tale.
The truck purrs and yowls. Its strained gears grind. The engine works beneath me, all around as I lower my foot to the gas. I feel my centuries-old vehicle shudder as I drive it, seized with a fear all its own. We shoot down Bell, then swing a left onto McCarthy, through a wooded patch of Will County. The road below sprawls endlessly ahead of me like a wicked tongue. My truck protests. It begs, "Please, can we stop? Let us stop." But I don't stop. Stopping stopped being an option a damn long time ago. I crush my food harder to the gas pedal until I can't push it any further. The truck and I fly through the fog so dense I can't see a thing beyond it. Treetops, like the heads of giants, are all that I can discern from the endless gray fog of the world outside the windshield. Then I see two eyes emerge from the road. Eyes lit completely by my truck's high beams. The eyes are 10 feet away, then 5. I barely register the body those eyes are attached to until the crying tires of my truck runs them over and crushes them into paste. I slam the brakes. My gut hits the steering wheel with the force of a punch I've deserved for many years. A slick resistance on the tires delays the act of stopping, and I already know. This is a mess I am not qualified to deal with. The truck heaves and groans, and finally, with a great effort, stops on the road at last. I throw the truck into park without a second thought, hurling my body from the driver's seat and falling to the pavement. I feel my bare feet carry me towards the vague, lumpy shape of whatever I'd hit with the truck. Pebbles cut the undersides of my feet, but I push past it. Now that I'm outside the truck, the fog feels all-encompassing. The sky looks over-encumbered with that massive grayness. I worry that if I stay outside too long, all the sky will fall atop of my body and crush me. I run for a length of time that feels impossible. The shape of the thing I've run over lies unmoving on the paved road. Each step I take makes it clearer, with its legs sticking upright like vines, that the thing I've hit is an animal. Then one antler sticking upright from the animal's massive head makes it undeniable. A buck. I stop a few feet from the body. It's massive. The buck takes up over half the road, laying on its side in a way that looks wrong for the animal so large. It's too vulnerable. The buck's stomach is torn in two, the meat half pulverized, with red and pink of muscle melding against white, crushed bone. This amalgamation coats the buck's entrails, which hangs from its stomach like loose wires. All of this gushes from its gut onto the black pavement, the blood seeping into the ground as though the ground were thirsting for it. The hooves hang uselessly in the air. The sight of the body isn't what gets me. It's the smell. When I lean in closer, the stench hits me like a brick wall. There's the reeking scent of animal, something hormonal and wild, and tinted with urine. There's the smell of animal's lunch. How the digestive tract had not anticipated never finishing its meal. There's the smell of slick, dirty blood, which is so similar to my own that I want to cry. I'm sick. I walk backwards and stumble, and almost fall. But I don't. I dread looking at the buck's head, but some part of me knows I have to. I hoist myself upright. I feel myself shudder now. I feel myself whine and groan, and beg my feet to stop. But of course they don't. I walk slowly towards the buck's massive head. Its right antler sticks up straight into the air, and even in death it strikes fear into my heart. I wonder what lives fell victim to those antlers. I hesitate before meeting its eyes. When I do, I wish I hadn't. The buck's eyes are wide open, bugging out from its head with pure surprise. Its pupils stare through me. The buck looks at me with horror splitting open its features, each muscle twisted with agony and short-lived fear. The buck seemed to look right through me. The thing it sees there has scared it into stillness. I take a step back. I'm muttering something to myself, but the words feel foreign, and I don't understand what I'm saying. I just stay that way, frozen in the middle of the road, not knowing what to do. I feel as trapped to this spot on the road as the buck. I can't rip my gaze from its eyes. I can't shake the feeling that something could sense me there. Then the eyes blink. My blood runs cold. I feel like I'm going insane. The fog makes everything look off somehow, and fear has a way of screwing with people. I know it's just me seeing things I shouldn't, looking too closely at what's already done. Even so, a single cold drop of sweat falls down the length of my spine. Then the eyes blink again, and this time I just can't justify it. Another blink, and another. The eyes flutter as though blinking away at pesky irritant. It blinks, and blinks, and blinks. I beg my legs to deliver me from this. I try to break the spell, try moving myself from this place, but my legs are heavy, metal things, and I glued to the ground. Gravity and fear grasp me like the hands around the neck of some newly caught prey. I am trapped. I let myself cry. The buck blinks rapidly. Nothing else of the animals moves. Then, as though a flip had been switched, it stopped. The glossy brown-black pupils shift lower. I feel the buck search for me among the fog, and then the eyes lock in place. I know that it sees me. A low, strangled sound echoes from the corpse, pouring from its ripped open gut. It's half laughter, half crying. Its violin strings ripped from the instrument and thrown to the ground. It's a music box stomped by a large leather boot. It's the sing-song of birds as they're gnawed on by wolves. I can't stand it. I claw at my own ears and scream, "Stop! Please stop!" The buck screeches. Its tongue flops into its mouth. Its neck jerks with a motion as laborious as it looks unnatural. And the buck lifts its massive head from the rest of its body. Tears pour down my face, wet my nose and lips. I scream for my feet to carry me back to the truck. My entire body feels trapped in molasses. I can't move quick enough. The buck thrashes its broken neck wildly side to side, its tongue swaying from broken-toothed lips. The laugh just echoes across the vacant pavement against tall, ancient trees. The buck stops. It stares at me, wide-eyed, a stalemate. "What do you want?" I say. It comes out calm. The buck wears no expression. Its eyes just bug from its head as its lips work hard to form language. "Behind," it ekes out. "What?" I ask it. "What?" The buck thrashes its head. "Behind! Run! Behind!" Then I hear the groaning and whining of my truck from behind me. The yellow high beams up the road in front of me, and suddenly I understand everything. My body can move again. I turn around slowly, and there I see myself in the truck. Me driving towards me. I know what I need to do now. I close my eyes.
Thank you for listening to the Nightmare Anthology. Tonight, you read grand stories of the paranormal and the strange. You were introduced to a grand array of human suffering. Fear is a fact of life, and thus you have faced it. Thank you. Creative minds fuel this world by exploring these themes of fear and suffering to help understand it. I am proud of all the artists who came to create this. I only wish to inspire you all to do the same. Goodbye, and stay safe.
So long, Mom, I'm off to drop the bomb, so don't wait up for me. But while you swelter down there in your shelter, you can watch me on your TV. While we're attacking frontally, watch Brinkley and Huntily describing contrapuntily the cities we have lost. No need for you to miss a minute of the agonizing Holocaust. Yeah! Little Johnny Jones, he was a U.S. pilot, and no shrinking violet was he. He was mighty proud when World War III was declared. He wasn't scared, no siree. And this is what he said on his way to Armageddon. So long, Mom, I'm off to drop the bomb, so don't wait up for me. But though I may roam, I'll come back to my home, although it may be a pile of debris. Remember, Mommy, I'm off to get a commie, so send me a salami and try to smile somehow. I'll look for you when the war is over.